The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to Sustainable Voice. It's Ashish and Leigh. Good to have you all with us again. We got a special guest and actually a gift for every one of our listeners, especially those of you who like coming at me on social media, which our social media guys are really good at responding. There was one, by the way, I have to tell you, Leigh, that actually said something, and his profile picture was Ryan Gosling. And his question was, why would somebody want to go to Chile? And our social media guys, for the same reason somebody wants to put Ryan Gosling as a profile picture, free will. It was awesome. That was the best answer. So with that, all of our listeners get the best gift ever. I'm going to do the least amount of talking here because I'm actually not the expert here. We have somebody who's really amazing who is joining us today. So please give a huge welcome to Sue Rooney. Hi, Sue.
Hello, guys.
So Sue is going to be the rock star. Leigh, how about you bring in Sue and tell the world about Sue? And Sue, tell the world about yourself. And by the way, as you're listening, if you guys like what you're listening, hit that subscribe button. You can find us on all your favorite avenues to listen to us, whether it's visual, audio. Chime in, join the conversation, have fun at it. Our social media guys are getting really good at responding to some of your comments. So please have at it. But in the meantime, Leigh, I'll let you take it away.
Oh my gosh, my friend Sue, where do I start? So we've been friends for over 30 years. We worked together in the small ship expedition industry way back when we were wee young lasses. And she is just an amazing human. She is an Alaska storyteller. She is does product development for Alaska tour companies. She is involved in philanthropy and nonprofit. She's been the director of several nonprofits in Seattle. I'm just always amazed at Sue and all of the good work she's doing. But we brought her here today because she may disagree with me, but I believe that she's an expert in the history of the indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. And she's developed a lot of those friendships along the way. She's been adopted into the Tlingit tribe. She's in the Eagle clan. Maybe we'll get her to tell us her name, her tribal name. Um, but she really understands governmental affairs, the importance of responsible travel. And on top of that, she's raised two amazing young women who are out in the world making it better for us all. So I know Sue will tell you that tribal members have their own story to tell. But today we are honored that she can give us a lesson in the history of the Alaska Native Corporation and tell us more about how the tribes are working to protect their interests in their land and their society. So, my friend Sue, welcome.
Sue, how much of that did she get right? I think she undersold you because in the brief time that I got to know you, she undersold that. You're even more impressive in person. Oh, I gotta say, I mean, yeah, you've been doing this for about 30 years.
Yeah, yes. And I think that, thank you. You're both of you so much. You're very kind. I can, I'll just be honest and say that I'm a non-native, right? And so the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, it became fascinating to me over time. I didn't go into Alaska wondering, hey, what are the policies and legislations in place right now governing the actions of the state? No, who does that? Nobody does that. I was in my 20s. I wanted to see whales and glaciers and bears. Oh my. And we did see those things. And the longer I think any one of us spends time in a place, we begin to recognize that nothing exists in a vacuum. Those whales aren't just there. Some of those whales are there because of legislation, because they are protected. Some of those glaciers, which, yes, have been melting for a very long time, but are now melting faster, are melting faster because of legislation. Everything we do is affected by unseen policy. And it is such a boring, heavy, detailed arena to go into. Very few of us ask those questions. I began to ask the question of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act without knowing that it had a name or existed, because other people I was learning from were saying things like, there are no reservations in the state of Alaska. That piqued my interest.
Is that true?
there is one reservation in the state of Alaska. And even though there are over, at the time, okay, so if we want to just do a real quick flash look at kind of the state of Alaska in terms of settlement, the Russians came over in the 1700s, and the English were coming from the east, and the Spanish were coming from the south, and then the Americans kind of popped into the scene. This was point blank. This was ground zero for the last massive tribal engagement for the rights of the tribal people, of native peoples, to face colonialism on a grand scale. And I'm talking mostly, of course, in terms of white history, US history, colonial history in the Americas. So I just, I will couch it in that as the Russians and the English and the Spanish and the Americans, and to some degree, some of the French influence was happening, Alaska became just that last point where it all came together, and laws had to be written in reaction, actually, to what was happening in the lower 48 and in Canada and in other places in the Americas, which were all being exposed to high-level colonialism and settlement based on what? The doctrine of discovery. So there are so many topics we could delve into here.
Well, let's go. Are you kidding me? I'm a sponge right now. Let's go.
So my knowledge really comes from a profound sense of wonder and a profound sense of curiosity, because I want to be a storyteller and I want to not make mistakes. I have an ego and I want to say things that are accurate. So I've spent a lot of time reading absolutely everything I can read, watching YouTube videos, going to regional corporations, going to the villagers, Alaska is different, and asking, how does this work? This is the result. Our conversation today will be the result of basically just my curiosity. I am not a tribal member, and I'm excited actually to hear that you two could pursue getting an actual benefactor of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act into your podcast, because they're going to have information and exposure to things I simply won't. So I am here to lay the groundwork for, how did this happen? How did Alaska come out so different? There is one group of people in the state of Alaska who, while Canada was pushing its colonial policies forward, there were a group of Tsimshian people. And the Tsimshian people were primarily in what is now Canada, and also the interior of what is just to the east of the southeast panhandle in the state of Alaska. So there were Tsimshian, Haida, and Tlingit people, very similar in culture and language, very different people. If you ask them individually, they're like, I am not Haida, I am Tsimshian. Now, a village came over from Canada because they were getting really nervous about the banning of potlatches, which is a cultural celebration, and also a way that the communities of tribal people would stay in touch with each other and kind of establish their own uniqueness within the larger cultural environment. So a potlatch included spending 2, 3, 5 years creating goods and creating materials that would then be given away when the potlatch was held. And a potlatch is simply, again, it's a kind of a cultural gathering through which a village shows its riches. When a village can show that it is wealthy, it is therefore showing it is powerful. And this is how these folks could establish themselves, again, to their neighbors.
I have so many questions. I have so many questions. Leigh, how many questions do you have right now? You know this stuff already. I have so many questions.
I do. I'm along for the ride, but I love it. I love where we're going with this. And we wanted to have Sue on because we wanted to be able to draw those parallels between, because one of your big pain points, Ashish, is trying to figure out how these other native societies around the world can have more of a say. And so it seems to me like
it's
model.
So I will just close the loop on that one piece. When the group came over they basically fled Canada. They came into what is now Southeast Alaska. And
Sorry. One question. Why did they flee Canada? Just for our listeners, I want to. So, what caused them to flee? Because I'm married to a Canadian. She listens.
They did not like the banning of the potlatch. The potlatch was a deeply ingrained cultural reality. And when Canada outlawed potlatching, they did so because in the eyes of the settlers, in the eyes of the Canadians, they were watching these villagers throw these parties, and they would give away everything to the point of destitution. Their food, their blankets, their digging implements, their cooking implements. They gave away to the point of destitution, not understanding that this tribe, in its generosity, would then be invited to neighboring potlatches over the next several years. And all of those materials would come back to them as a form of a thank you. And by the way, we're rich and powerful too. So we're going to give you these 3 canoes. Oh my gosh. So if you gave away 3 canoes in your potlatch, you might end up getting 2 back from the next 6 potlatches. And now you're in better shape.
Timeline this from you. How long ago was this? Put a time date on this.
All of this was robustly an occurrence up until about the 1800s. Once countries were being established. Here's a little fun fact: when Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery, he abolished it for all Americans, at least on paper, which actually really negatively affected these tribal cultures on the Northwest coast because they were slaveholders. They raided each other's villages regularly, and the more powerful the tribe, the more slaves they had from neighboring villages. They would even go on these canoe journeys. They would take their canoes all the way down the coast as far as California, would make raids, and would actually take slaves and bring them back to
Do you see smoke coming out of my ears right now? Like my mind's going in a million different places. Okay, so this is one of the favorite phrases that Leigh and I always talk about on this podcast is unintended consequences, right? Whether it's what the IMF does, the World Bank does, which I'm still waiting for them to come on this podcast for a debate, by the way. So unintended consequences. You just mentioned a massive unintended consequence of somebody who is revered.
Yes.
Okay. I already get hate mail, so you might as well go ahead and finish the sentence. Go ahead, it's fine. Keep going.
Yeah. This is hurting cats. This whole topic. You couldn't get a PhD in this topic because there's still too much information to learn. That being said, a Canadian village was established in what is now the state of Alaska.
Okay.
And even my language, right? I'm saying Canada. It wasn't a Canadian village. It was a Tsimshian village that was fleeing from the overbearing rules that the Canadian authorities were putting on them, thinking they would escape those banning of potlatches. Even though it's all the same missionaries coming up and down the coast, going after whoever they were going to go after to bring them to Jesus, these folks fled. Okay, once they were established on an island on the southern tip of the Alaska Panhandle, they had a choice. So I'm going to move us directly to 1968. Okay, we're at 1968.
Not that long ago, but okay, yeah, go ahead.
There were native claims just holding back everything from the state of Alaska to move forward with all sorts of things. I'm going to move back to 1959 real quick. In 1959, Alaska became the 49th state.
Yes.
And Hawaii came just after. 1959, yes. I was already born.
Alaska was not was not part of the United States before 1959. No. Really?
It was a U.S. territory. It was U.S. territory.
Like Puerto Rico. Okay, got it. Okay. I was sitting here, I'm like, wait a second. I paid attention in history class through college and high school. I know I heard this. It makes perfect sense now. Keep going.
The reason why it was so late for Alaska to become a state, because we had a presence there. As soon as we became a nation, we had a presence there. The gold was found in 1898, but there were
that's what did it. Yeah. Keyword right there. Got it.
Yeah. Alaska is a history of rushes. First it was gold, then it was fur. Sorry, first it was actually fur. Then it was fish, timber, gold, and then it became oil. So Alaska is deeply marked by massive resource extraction and gaining riches by focusing on resource extraction. Without resource extraction, Alaska, even today, cannot exist. Cannot exist.
So I'm going to stop for 1 second. Because my mind's blown. I gotta digest this. This is a lot, and I'm loving all of it. I'm a history buff. This is like drinking from a fire hydrant. It's amazing. I love it. Leigh, you're enjoying this too. You're watching my eyes going. Wait. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to draw a parallel here. So I was Leigh knows this. I was second generation born in Kenya. So I obviously spent a lot of time in Africa. I go back, several times a year. And I spent a lot of time up in the northern parts of my native Kenya, northern parts up in an area called the Northern Rangelands Trust. And not just there, right? Whether it's in communities that are non-contactable communities within parts of South America, whether it is Northern Rangelands Trust, I spent a lot of time within these communities to learn how they live, to learn their way of life, to help protect their way of life. But there is a common thread among all of them, and I'm curious if this exists in Alaska because it feeds into what you're talking about, right? So these communities have all been, for lack of better words, pillaged, right? Somebody has come in and just taken everything, whether it's a community in the Amazon, whether it's a Samburu community in Kenya. They just come in, and even though they see themselves as wealthy, their optics show that they're impoverished, even though they're not. And they end up either willfully or unwillingly giving away almost everything to the point of destitution, as you said. And it's almost like where somebody comes as the savior complex, right? Somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I can help," and they come in and then they don't leave. Is that what's happening in Alaska as well with these communities? Is that what you said would be happening? That you said they gave away things to the point of destitution, and I grab on that because everything else, you were talking about the history of how we got here with the potlatches and that, which is fantastic. But then you mentioned something very key about them giving away their stuff, their rights, their way of life to the point of destitution, which is a common thread. Why was that happening there? And then I'll tell you why it was happening, why I believe it was happening in the other areas. But why was that happening in these communities in Alaska?
Yes. Culturally speaking, I would say that the tribes themselves, if we were all speaking the same language during that colonial and settlement and exploration era, the tribes under no circumstance would, I want to be really careful. Alaska has over 300 separate native, federally recognized native tribes. These are not Indians. These are Inuits. These are Aleut. These are, and the Aleuts actually should be called the Alutics. By the way, for your listeners, there's no such thing as an Eskimo. They are Inuit, they are Yupik, they are Alutic, they are Eyak, and there are also Athabascans and Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian. And if you speak to these people, don't please make the mistake of saying, these are Indians. These are Indians in Alaska. They are not. There are
it's offensive.
So many
it's
different
beyond
languages.
Offensive.
In the United States, there are less than 500 federally recognized tribes. Over half of them are in Alaska, and they speak different languages and have different cultures. And I want to establish that right for your guests now, because in Alaska, they created a federation of massive, hundreds of nations, literally hundreds of nations, separate languages, not all, 292 separate languages were spoken in Alaska at the time of European advancement. So we are talking about hundreds of different communities and cultures, and it was so much more beautiful when we allowed this truth to be known, in my opinion. All right, now a potlatch. I'm sorry if we're bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, that's okay.
The potlatch, under no circumstance would any native person in any of these, particularly Southeast Alaska tribes, say, "Now we are destitute. Now we have nothing." They would have, the week after, they have this multiple day event where they are giving things away. Remember, they were living on the shores of one of the most biologically productive regions the planet has ever produced. They could walk to the shore and have food They had permanent villages. These were not nomadic people in Southeast Alaska. In the interior, absolutely nomadic, following caribou, following bison. But on the coast, they were in permanent villages with summer camps. Okay, so I am focused right now only on that particular culture. By giving away what you have, you are doing one very clear thing. You are telling, if I were sitting here today in my house and I invited everyone in my neighborhood to come in and take everything they wanted, I would be destitute if that was the end of the story. But the culture says now everyone who has received something from me will in turn give me something better in return.
And does that actually happen?
Yeah, that is how this culture worked. So some of the most powerful tribes in Southeast Alaska, they lived in Wrangell, they lived in Haines, and these are communities that had more access to fresh water, and interior tribes. So if you were on an island, you were more isolated and you couldn't trade as easily as the tribes on the coast could. So some of the tribes, speaking of location, location, location in good business practice, some of these tribes had location, location, location. White people came and they were appalled. They were like, this is stupid. This is crazy. Look at these people. They're living in furs. They have nothing to eat. Of course, they had something to eat. They always had something to eat. That's why their art forms were so well developed. You don't get art without having the bottom rung of your Maslow's hierarchy of needs met. You have safety, you have food, you have community, you have love. Boom. Now you have art. You don't have art before you have those things. That is why the coastal people all up and down the west coast of the Americas had riches, because they had food.
So this, I'm gonna draw again. I'm gonna basically come back because there's so much information you're sharing. Leigh, when you were on your expedition ships, did you get this detailed information from people who were going on shore?
Through people through storytellers like Sue, who would, help all of our travelers understand that. And I was lucky enough that the company I worked for would actually bring local guests like Joe Williams on board, but not to this extent. No, I honestly, I was more concerned with, making sure everything was operating properly. So I have to say, I'm definitely learning right along with you today.
I'll tell you why I asked. So, when I spent some time up with one of the Samburu communities up in the north, and it's exactly as you said, right? You can't label them as they're Maasai. They're not. Just like these are not Indians, right? I mean, 100%. There's so many different ways to put this, and what you're talking about with the potlatch is where the end of the story isn't they just gave their stuff away. The end of the story is what they got back, and this is where the cycle got broken in the Amazon, right? So within the Amazon jungle, and I'll come back to Samburu community in a second, but in the Amazon jungle, it was XYZ corporation that would say, give us your land and we'll give you all these amazing Western things, big screen TVs, electronics, this, that, you name it, right? They would give everything, but then the chain would break because they wouldn't give them electricity, right? So then all of a sudden that trust mechanism is broken. Then that community is destitute.
Yes.
Then they are living in poverty. When you go to those Samburu communities, I visited one. I remember it was up way up north, and they actually, so typical Samburu communities, when you go in to actually be immersed into their community, there is a process. My father's car broke down near these communities, so he told me about this, way back. My late father, and they take a little hole, they pinch a hole in the cow's neck right here, very small hole, and they take blood out. Then they milk the cow right there, and they give you the glass and go, you have to drink this first. This is the process. It's disgusting, obviously, for us, but for them, they're drinking about the gallon. But that was part of their process. What was amazing was I was there with a couple of people that from other countries, and they jumped right to, oh my gosh, look at how they live. How can I help? How am I able to help and whatnot? And the owner of this particular one of the elders, she sat down with me and through a translator was talking to me, and she said, and they have a different word for foreigners. It's a derogatory term, but basically the way they use it is they're basically saying that Why do these people come here and think that we have nothing?
Yes.
Look at how many goats I have.
Yes.
Look at my home. Look at how many chickens I have. Look at how many children I have. Look at how many husbands I have. Look at that the definition of wealth. And I think that's what you alluded to here, right? The end of the story, everybody heard, and all of our listeners, and I don't blame you, I did the same thing. You hear potlatch, oh my God, you gave away your stuff. No, wait. If the chain works perfectly, then what you get back is better. And then you give that away, and what you get back is better. And then the boat keeps rising and rising and rising and rising and rising. But somewhere along the way, it gets corrupted. So here's a question for you specifically around these communities. And Leigh, feel free, you probably know this as well. How do you keep that from being corrupted? How do you keep these? In the case of Colombia, for example, and even in Costa Rica, there are communities that are deemed non-contactable, right? Foreigners cannot have access. I've worked very closely with the Colombian government. I've worked very closely with other different governments to be able to identify these communities that were not part of the peace treaty or part of the tourism equation, but they're deemed non-contactable, right? That's their label, and it's being respected. Is that what happens here, or how do you prevent this from being corrupted? How do you keep this chain intact? Not just 70 years ago or 150 years ago, today, especially when you're talking about 60%, over 60% of the indigenous communities, the native communities in all of the US in Alaska. 300 of the 500 in Alaska. How do you protect that from being corrupt?
You don't. It's over. Right? It's already too late. So it's over. And I do think that you will find, and this is where the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act really kicks in. And we will not have time. I am so sad to say we won't have time, but we can certainly revisit this.
We're going to have you back. Don't you worry.
Okay. So let me just say that potlatching is absolutely a thing of the past in terms of its formal role in tribal society writ large. Does that mean potlatches don't happen anymore? No. Joe Williams and his family, they still have their own version of potlatching. All tribal people who potlatched as a cultural tradition in the past, in the state of Alaska anyway, they're still potlatching. It just comes in different forms. Right now, they're heading over to whatever version of grocery store they've got in their communities during events that are that would be potlatched 200 years ago. They're now potlatching whatever 6 packs of Diet Pepsi or other things that are less meaningful, I think, less needed, but
Sure.
Culturally they have not let go of that give and receive. It's a reciprocal relationship, and that reciprocity has not left the culture, although it's much more difficult because it's all monetized now. It's all monetized, and it's personal. This is no longer a large, well, no, I wouldn't say that. You'd need to speak to tribal peoples to understand to what degree they're still potlatching.
Okay, so is the Alaska Native Corporation, are they working on trying to scale what does exist to be able to try to bring it back? Or
No. And here's why. Multiple versions of different sovereign nations. So you can't ask Inuit people and Yupik people and Alutiiq people and Tsimshian Haida Athabascans. They are now considered one federation, legal on a legal footprint. They are one body. They are one entity, and they are technically existing formally within the United States under the umbrella of a corporation. Tribal peoples in the lower 48 of the US are absolutely not viewed this way. They are viewed as sovereign nations on land bases, which they own no subsurface rights to. Some of the Alaska corporations, not recognized as tribal villages with individual languages and histories, they are seen as literally corporations in the state of Alaska. The one group that's remained a reservation, the Tsimshian, they remained a reservation because they were unclear as to what the heck was happening to them. And they were afraid of these influences. So they said, we're out. We're already disrupted. We don't know. We just no more. And they're on Metlakatla, and they're still there as a reservation. They are their jurisdiction. The people who have kind of government relations with them is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Not the case with every other village in Alaska. They are considered independent corporations. The quick and dirty of it is, when Alaska wanted to become a state, they had not cleared up native claims.
Got it.
Okay. In 1959, the federal government had to convey land to the state. 104 million acres went to the state, and about 40 million acres went to the tribes. That was kind of a cluster. It was a bit of a mess.
Are you surprised?
Not at all. And let me just, this is the key takeaway from when I finally understood why the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was passed. Number one, if you have claims in your state against you, you are legally stuck in certain political scenarios or legislative scenarios. You're stuck until you settle the claims.
You can't go any further.
Alaska Native people still had claims, live claims. Meanwhile, they're watching the lower 48 and they're like, under no circumstances is that going to happen here. We will not let them do that to us, because of the over 400 treaties signed in the 1800s with tribal peoples in this country before Andrew Johnson passed the Indian Removal Act, which is literally legalizing a Holocaust. That's exactly what that was in hindsight, and it makes me sick, and I will say that out loud. Now you know my bias.
But I'm going to stop right there. Is that, I want to ask you about that real quick. Is that fact, opinion, political fact? Is that documented?
You can, the more I've studied, because to understand Alaska, I needed to understand the lower 48. And I also do a Lewis and Clark presentation that includes a lot of tribal history. It's a lot of everybody. Nothing is without objective feelings, right? So yes, the Indian Removal Act was passed by Andrew Jackson. And in doing so, he allowed for basically what led to the Trail of Tears. And if you look at every single treaty signed by the United States government and any individual sovereign nation of tribal people, every one of them has been broken. Every single
who's breaking them?
The United States government. The Nez Perce Indians here in Washington or Idaho, they were their first treaty in 1855 was signed for 5,000 square miles. A couple of years later, gold was found within those 5,000 square miles. Within 3 years, that treaty was rewritten, and they went from 5,000 square miles of land to 500 square miles of land.
So they could mine the gold.
Right. And Chief Joseph is somebody we all revere as this wonderful person. It was he who was never, ever allowed to go back to his homeland. In the lower 48, he was banished from his lands in Oregon. He was sent all around the United States. He got sent to prisons. Then he ended up dying, and he's in an unmarked grave in the Colville Native Reservation, not even his own people. These types of stories layer and layer and layer themselves one on top of another. In the case of Alaska, they were watching this and they said, that won't happen to us. There is a very crucial name you should know. The name is Emil Notti. It is capital E-M-I-L, capital N-O-T-T-I. If you want to know anything about who really got his feet into Washington, D.C. and said, we're going to stand here and we're going to hold this line, and we are not going to become reservations, and we are not going to let you continue to allocate lands to the federal government and to the state government and not recognize the tribal claims that are here and are present. No one was moving on tribal claims until in 1968, what was found in the state of Alaska, what was found?
Oil.
Boom, baby. Oil was found in the state of Alaska, and the land claims were overlapping these oil fields, the subsurface oil fields. The state literally could not move forward. The federal government could not move forward until the claims were dealt with. All of a sudden, within 3 years, the entire U.S. Congress was like, what is it going to take? And, fun fact, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was passed and written by tribal people. It is the only tribally aligned legislation in the history of this country written by the people it was going to govern. The tribes wrote their own laws. But what they got out of it, and this will be another conversation, 44 million acres out of the almost 600 million acres in Alaska, actually closer to 570. They got 44 million acres and they got $962 million, less than $1 billion. And this is 1971. And that established
split among how many people, the population?
Yes, good. It was basically that money went into 12 regional corporations, which meant Alaska's several hundred tribal villages, unique tribal villages, had to then become 12 corporate units. Those 12 corporate units were the receiving end of the allotments of land and dollars from Congress. From those 12 regional corporations, they are the high-level administrators of the resources. They then didn't govern, but then were able to pass through the funds to roughly 200. There are now fewer than 200, but at the time there were about 200 village corporations associated with one of the 12 regional corporations. In that one single act of legislation, all tribal people in the state of Alaska became corporate shareholders. Every single person born by December 17th or so, 1971, received 100 shares of stock in their regional corporation. And then they had to start to learn very quickly, because they had 20 years before those stocks could be sold or before the land could be taxed. So for 20 years, 1971 to 1991, the tribes in Alaska had to literally become corporate. And that was an act of massive assimilation that was so effective, because there were billions and billions of dollars of oil waiting to come out of the ground. By 1981, $12 billion of oil had come out of Alaska. Now, let's remember, in 1971, all tribal people, hundreds of villages, received what? A total of 44 million acres of land and $962 million. 10 years later, $12 billion had been produced in oil. Did the tribes see that money? Some, yes. The school systems got great support from it, the ferry systems. You'll find today that because oil revenues are shrinking, they're cutting everything. Ferries are being cut, schools are being cut, everything's being cut, because the state itself, as I mentioned earlier, does not exist without resource extraction. It cannot exist without gold, silver, copper, oil, trees, fish.
Just because I'm a numbers guy, and Leigh knows this, how many actual people are we talking about within those tribes? If we were to total up the number of people, so $972 million split among how many people?
People. Today's population in Alaska, 15%. So about 100, I'm going to say about 130 to 150,000 people are considered shareholders within one of the 12. And
Are these taxable structures?
in 1991, those lands could have been taxed, but there was an amendment to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and only lands that, let's say you and your village received, of those 44 million acres, you got 1.5 million acres somewhere. And you decided you wanted to create a small sawmill. Only upon the construction of the sawmill and then the work can now that land be taxed and the business be taxed. Any undeveloped land within those allotments cannot today be taxed. They almost were, but the law was amended in 1991.
So it's almost like a disincentive to use the land. You basically have to leave the land undisturbed. If you try to do anything on the land, you're going to get taxed.
You will be taxed, correct. But, and this is where things are, your mind is going to get blown right now.
It's already is, but keep going. Go ahead.
This one is a doozy, and this one I find really, it's just a doozy. because these are corporations, corporations can make investments anywhere, right? And some of these regional corporations have done quote unquote very well because they lived in a land of high value natural resources. Some corporations have gone bankrupt. Some of the villages have gone bankrupt. There is an automatic profit sharing clause within the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act structure, and there is profit sharing between the regional corporations based on the nature of the work, extraction versus investment. So
Sure.
you will find that many tribes have investments in Hawaii. They own hotels in Hawaii. They own hotels internationally. But they are also investing in the same things that many of us invest in when we buy a fund. They are invested, unfortunately, in ICE, immigration control. So they are now a part of the larger machine of the United States money-making engines that, when you're looking at what the actions of ICE are versus what the inputs were that degraded tribal cultures and tribal ability to maintain their cultures, there's a lot of now, there are a lot of hard conversations being had.
So, and to all of our listeners, before you start sending putting those comments and starting that hate mail, just think about what she just said. This isn't political. We're not talking about who's in the White House. This has nothing to do with that. This transcends politicians. This is actually about where the money is going, and I bring it up that way because this episode is about drawing parallels to communities and organizations in lesser developed parts of the world, like the Northern Rangelands Trust in Kenya. But there really is no parallel. It is a separate set of problems. There, they banded together to create this land conservation trust, right? And I was working at the time. I remember I was in Australia working with a sustainability manager of a particular property, and he was telling me about the Indigenous communities that were laying claim to the land. And so he had developed, I was helping him to put together a land conservation trust concept where it was basically, for every acre the hotel uses, 3 acres go to the community, right? A 1 for 3. His issue was that 2 communities were arguing about whose land it was. So they have to go back to historical documents. What it's like, well, you guys figure out whose land it is. It's not so simple anymore. That's a pretty simple solution to fix. Now you're talking about legislation that is either been violated, amended, rewritten, no longer applies, or all of the above, right? Any of them or all of the above. And then you're talking about capital instruments, right? For-profit entities that are taxed, whether they're S Corps, C Corps, whatever the case. They're for-profit entities that are either paying taxes or benefiting from tax breaks. And this brings a question. If there is an entity, and this might be too technical, so I apologize if it is, but if one of those regional corporations, let's say, runs a loss one year, profit the next year, does the community benefit from the loss carryover? Meaning, do they get the tax write-off on those losses in the following year's profits, or does that not get trickled down to the communities?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because these are for-profit corporations. So it just shows. I mean, when you look at some of the lesser developed parts of the world, so when you look at a place like Kenya, there is a concerted effort, and it was by force. There's a concerted effort to acknowledge the communities. It's not just 2 communities. There's tens and tens of dozens that are there. But they were forced to face them and acknowledge them because they had a presidential election that went completely sideways in 2008. And because all the communities felt that they were not represented properly, one of the many reasons, the country was forced to write a constitution in 2008. Now they're trying to rewrite it and whatnot, but it was the first constitution for a country that gained independence in 1963. You start looking at places like Peru that have had, what do we say, Leigh? It was 11 presidents in 22 years or something like that? It was something ludicrous. And their constitution's been ratified and amended and ratified and amended and wants to be rewritten and discarded and then, thrown out and sacked. And it's a document that gets tossed around. And what I'm learning from you and what I think we have to acknowledge, and you said it in the very beginning, you're a storyteller without ego. That without ego part is what everybody misses. When you
No, I
start
got
talking,
plenty of ego. I got plenty.
oh, I
of
know
ego.
you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in this case, what I love about how you put this is you start off by saying, I'm not I'm not a tribal member. You were, yes, you were accepted into a particular tribe, but you're not a tribal member. You acknowledge that in the beginning, and I loved how you told the story. That's why I asked you about the Andrew Johnson claim. And I specifically asked that question on purpose because I wanted to ask you, okay, wait, is that political? Is that, you answered it right away and said, no, look, it's fact. This is the case. So I only say that because to all of our listeners, and we have a lot of them, thank you all for listening. This isn't political. This podcast isn't political. We're not trying to sway you to vote one way or the other. I don't care who you vote for. I just want you to think critically. You know, we've always said that. I just want you to think for yourself and think critically and think independently. Who you vote for is your business. This is not about that. And in society today, we get so caught up with, okay, well, this means I should vote for so-and-so. So-and-so had to be elected. No, not one of them. I guarantee you, not one of the candidates that we have elected over the last 30 years or the last 40 years either knew enough to do something, had the power to do something, or was smart enough to actually know what the problem was. Any one of those three or all three. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with that and more.
And more.
I was having an amazing conversation with a Canadian woman a couple of weeks ago, and we were both saying, how great would it be if instead of voting for an individual, just a series of outcomes, list a series of outcomes, and then vote for those outcomes. I don't care who that person is. I just want those outcomes.
You are reading our mind. We talked about this, Leigh, that debates shouldn't be about people. We should have the cabinet and specific key positions talking about scenarios and outcomes and asking them what they would do to get to that outcome, and then asking if the puppet master, whoever he or she is, actually understands what was said and was able to communicate that effectively to the entire cabinet. We were literally talking about this about 5 episodes ago, I think. Mm-hmm. This was a big part of it. So, okay, here's my next question. And this is one of our longest recordings because I'm a history buff. I'm a nerd. I'm loving, because I love where this is going. I'm going to draw a different comparison here. The Lewis and Clark, historically speaking, how are they viewed by the Indigenous communities?
Again, you're going to want to speak to Indigenous communities as a white, middle-class, United States citizen, raised in Boston, Massachusetts, with a East Coast white blue-collar family, and then I lived in Colorado for 10 years from junior high through college, and now I'm out here on the West Coast. Lewis and Clark, like all epic storytelling, has become exactly what it was based on the journals. We need to recognize that part of the reason why Lewis and Clark persists as kind of an epic American story is because over 1 million words in the form of journals were written. Because there's actual content available to us, because it was so recent, it was 220 years ago, we can elevate what we as current people living today, they were 28, 29, 30 years old and younger, walked from St. Louis to Astoria and back. Oh, hi, who does that? Nobody does that. Some people hike the Appalachian Trail. Some people hike the West Coast Trail, the Rocky Mountain Trail, or they go from Patagonia or South America to the Arctic. Wow, two people. Anyway, I have a lot to say about the Lewis and Clark expedition and how it's viewed, but there is so much academic information out there about them. And when tribes interface with that storyline, I will say this humbly, I will say this as a person with an ego and an opinion, those tribes are utilizing, it's like there's no such thing as bad press, right? Those tribes are able to utilize their proximity to, their interface with that story in order to hopefully elevate their own individual cultural story. Lewis and Clark.
So
The
they're
reason
aligning themselves. They're aligning themselves with a point in that story to say,
Right.
I was here when,
Yes.
or I was there when, or we were there when.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing in
It's
your eyes?
neither. And that's kind of like us talking about politicians. It's not an either or. It's really more of human beings do what they need to do to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel loved. That's what human beings do, to feel like they belong to something. If it benefits a tribe to say, I am related to the chief who shook the hand of Meriwether Lewis, if that benefits that tribal story, they're
They'll
going to
say
run
it.
with that.
Right.
There are plenty. They met over 50 tribes. That's not brought out in the Lewis and Clark storytelling from Ken Burns or Stephen Ambrose or these amazing writers who brought and continue to bring that story into our lives. They don't effectively ask the question of the minutia because the grand epic is what they're trying to convey. On a tribe to tribe basis, some folks are happy. If we have 5 minutes, I will tell you a fairly.
Yeah, we have all the time you need. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, you can edit whatever you want, right?
We're not editing any of this. We're keeping all of it in. Are you kidding me? We're keeping all this in. This is incredible.
Come back tomorrow for. I was working in 2023 on a small ship cruise as a onboard historian. My job was not to convey the overall natural and cultural history of the route, which went 500 miles basically from Lewiston, Idaho, down the Snake River to the Columbia River, all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, that's about 400 to 500 miles. I'm on a boat with 100 people, 100 guests. They're from all over the United States. Very few foreign travelers on this particular cruise line. A lot of vets take these cruises. A lot of Vietnam vets, a lot of Korean War vets, a lot of Iraq vets. A lot of vets take these cruises because the company markets to that base, if you will, of customers. So it is really impactful for me to be in the presence of people who understand war. I personally, not a vet. I've got vets in my family, but I am not close to our United States military in a family dynamic. On board our vessel, some clients, some guests came to me and said, hey, because people wear name tags, we're noticing that there's a guy on the boat and his last name is Clark. Do you think he's related to William Clark of Lewis and Clark? And I'm, of course, just giggling, thinking, Smith, Clark, Jones.
Patel.
Yeah. Out there, folks. And they said, no, we're really Ashish. You know that guy, Ashish. No, there's so many. No.
Actually, there are.
In your country.
They're all over. They're all over. And I'm married to somebody whose maiden name is Patel, and she's Canadian too. So I get it.
Not Cash. Okay, just checking.
No.
I am. So
well, it's similar. Well, it's not to digress, but similar. Patel is not a real last name. It's a given name. And it just that's like, but and this may apply here as well. But yeah, so like my wife's family last name, her maiden name is Patel. It's not the real last name. Anybody who's named Patel, there's a given last name, and it could be. There's a variety of them, right? So there are some members of our family who have a different last name. It's not the real last name, but that the name they were given dates back to some form of slavery. Then there are others who date back to the British occupation. There are some names who date back to something within their heritage. There's a variety of reasons, no one would. But does that occur here within these communities? Are there any assimilations in name, where let's say the either a community name or a given name or something has shifted to Anglo or to Western ways of it? Has that occurred at all?
All over the place. Joe Williams is a Tlingit Indian. His tribal name is Kakishket, and I'm not even pronouncing it as well as I could because I don't speak Tlingit, but every tribal person in this country uses English.
An Anglo name. Yeah, which I know that was the case. I went to school in Arizona. I lived out there for 6 years, and actually one of my roommates was a descendant of one of the local communities there. I forget the name of it at the time. I forget that, but she was telling me the story. just about that. Yeah, it's, her. I think she went by Sandy or Sally or something. It's been 20 plus years, but that was where it came from. So let's shift a little bit. I'm gonna.
We got it. Wait. We got to get back to the Clark story. We have to finish.
Oh yeah. Go.
A descendant of.
I'm so excited. Right.
It's like
I'm
like a kid in a candy store.
Thing, though, is it's incredibly interesting to go to tribal council meetings or city council meetings where tribal members are present and have a stake. They're a stakeholder, because I've been to several in which a tribal person has stood up and said, "My name is," and then they will say their name in their tribal language, which I butcher, and they'll say, "So my name is, X. My taxpayer name is Anne Murray. My taxpayer name is John Smith." Right.
Wow.
So this I have observed many times in the state of Alaska, and I'm thinking, good for you, just to establish my culture is still meaningful, and I will not apologize for that. And when they deliver the information, they're dead serious. They're not trying to make a joke. So
yep.
With the Clark thing, so there was a Clark on board, and in fact, yes, he would have been some version of a nephew. So his William Clark was the youngest of, I think, Anne Rogers Clark. His mother, I believe, had 10 children in 20 years. George Rogers Clark was part of the American Revolution. George Rogers Clark became a drunk because the United States would not reimburse him. When during the American Revolution, George Rogers Clark was led one of the many militias into Philadelphia to take back the Capitol, rifles in the air, crossing frozen streams or falling through frozen streams. George Rogers Clark was one of these guys. He lost his bag of receipts because the Congress had told him, just keep your receipts and turn them in and we'll reimburse you. He lost them. They did not reimburse him.
That was a good idea. That always works.
No.
That always works.
He was basically shamed. He received no money back. He became a drunk. He basically died destitute. It was really tragic. And William Clark, part of the reason that motivated him, because Thomas Jefferson tapped George Rogers Clark, not William, the younger brother, the oldest brother. And the timing was just crap. So 15 years later now, or 10 years later, here's William Clark, and he's very well regarded. And this Meriwether Lewis and William Clark partnership gets developed. And part of it was William Clark knew he'd make money if he could succeed with this, and he could pay off the debts of his brother George, who had already passed away. And that affected William's sense of honor deeply. Okay, fun story. One of William's brothers has a lineage. And I actually, this man, his name is Drew Clark. He and his wife were on the boat. And yes, in fact, they are part of that Clark family. And so I was able to sit with him, have dinner with him and his wife, and sort of say, you're kind of a point of curiosity on board, and I'm just here to laugh about it. But he's like, no, it's true. It's true.
How did you share any of what you've talked about here with him?
He and I became pen pals. I just said, okay. Now again, this can feel political, and because so much has now been turned into a battle between people when they talk about the ways that things have gone. And you can't have that when you're in a tourism scenario. No. You just need to say, this is a scenario that happened. Thank you very much.
Sue, we're going to be podcast pals. Don't you worry. This conversation is going to keep going. You know what? It's interesting because, as you said, it's exactly right. People are so married to their own version of history that, right or wrong, they're going to defend it. And there's a time and a place for it, obviously. But then the truth is the truth, right? That at some point it's going to come out. This is not nowhere near the same thing, but Leigh and I talked about this. In March, I was in Egypt with my family, and I have a freshman in university and then a 14-year-old daughter, going to be 14. We were in King Tut's tomb, looking over his body, looking over his mummy. And of course, all the history books talked about how he was either poisoned or murdered. He was, hit in the head. He was hit in the skull, and there was an impact there. That blunt force trauma caused the death, and whatever the case, or he was poisoned. And this particular historian we were with started pointing to his leg, which we could see clearly under the glass, and started pointing to the broken femur, and then started basically raising the thesis based on what he knew, because he is an active archaeologist as well, based on what he knew, that sepsis was actually the cause. And he was able to identify that around the bone, say, look at the condition of X, Y, and Z. There are signs of sepsis here. That is why this person passed away. And I only bring that up, not to draw a parallel here, but to basically say what you just said. We're so in love with our version of history, right? We will defend it to the gills. And I remember asking this question. Somebody, one of my teachers early on, telling me, we're doing something. She said, make sure you're on the right side of history. And I said, which side is right?
Yeah.
And so she said, well, you got to pay attention. And then she said something to me that I'll never forget. She said, well, you asked which side is right. And the answer to that is depends on when you're asking, because one side will be right one time, the next side will be right the other time. So which side is right, it depends on the timeline. You've got to be able, and she said that the way around that is what we said earlier, to think critically. Think for yourself. And that's what this podcast is about. We're not asking anybody to believe us, disagree, agree. Great, fantastic, whatever floats your boat. Just think for yourself. Just think independently, think for yourself, think critically, ask questions. And if something doesn't, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it sounds like a duck, great, it's a duck. But if it acts like a duck, but then the other two don't work in, ask more questions.
Well, and
right?
also, ravens can make the sound of a duck. So don't trust.
Exactly.
Trust.
I know dogs that made it sound like a duck sometimes.
Right? Birds
And,
can sound like
quarterbacks that throw flying ducks. So
baby.
yeah. So we're and I love this episode because this is one that I think is absolutely imperative. And I'm going to close this podcast by sharing some news from Leigh. Leigh, can I tell the world?
What about what I'm doing? No.
Yes. No, not the topic, but that this is that we are having a change of the guard. Can we talk about that at all?
Oh, yes. It's fine. You can talk.
All right. So Leigh listened to a podcast by a host who I respect. I listened to as well. I actually got to meet this particular person twice, and I love speaking to him. And so he had a guest on who talked about signal versus noise. And Leigh has realized what her signal is, and she's working on something cool. So over the next probably 4 to 5 episodes, we're going to be phasing Leigh out of the podcast. She'll still be coming on as a guest. Don't you worry. We're not letting her go anywhere. I revere this woman. I think she is absolutely one of the strongest women, one of the best mothers, and one of the most amazing people you'll ever meet. So she's not going very far.
Thank you.
So she's there. We are going to be transitioning. We're to a new guest host coming to join me after that point. So Leigh, I want to take this time just to say thank you.
Well, thanks.
It's been incredible. We've had some fun, had some laughs, got to really annoy the wrong people, the right people, got some great comedic responses, and comedic responses from our social media team, but we got people to think critically. And Sue, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and please don't be a stranger. Leigh, you and Leigh are going to be on regularly because I want to carry this on. We carry topics about Indigenous communities regularly and what it takes. The last episode was about Chile and the disconnect, right? I mean, and we talked specifically about how people we see as heroes that have given land to Chile are actually seen as conquerors by the local communities. And there's a huge divide to the point where some of the hotels will go to hire from the community. If the community member goes to work for them, they're excommunicated from their community just for taking that job. It has gotten that toxic in a kind. So we had talked about that on our last episode, and I was just telling Leigh before we came on air here that episode has actually, as of this recording, we had already surpassed 30,000 views on that particular short, on that particular promotion, just because of the fact that it seemed to hit It seemed to hit a chord. And I think, Sue, what you're talking about here is striking a chord, because Leigh said something in the very beginning when we were first planning this, that it's not as rosy as it seems.
Yeah.
In theory, it sounds great on paper, and that's the one common thread among everything with Indigenous communities, no matter where you are in the world. There are things that are right, things that are wrong. It is never going to be as rosy as it seems. There's no such thing as utopia. It's what we create and what we put forth. And the way that comes from is independent thought. We have to think freely to be able to unhinge ourselves so we can actually do what we see is right, not what we know is right. Because according to what my teacher said, what we know is right is going to change depending on the timeline. What could be right today could be wrong tomorrow, right? What could be wrong today could be right tomorrow, within reason. This is one where we simply wanted people listening to this episode to come back and just ask questions. You want to write letters to your Congress, fine, knock yourself out. I just want you to ask questions. If you're having a conversation at the dinner table with your children, with each other, ask questions. Raise a conversation, if not about this, about something, but just think for yourself. That's really all it's about.
We have like a lovely shared value and a sense of wonder. The older I get, the less I have a sense of confidence, and the more I am embracing my sense of wonder, because I don't know anything. All I really know is my own life story. Everything else, be humble. Most of us aren't right about most of the things we think we're right about.
That's actually really well said. So that's actually a great way to end this episode. Know what you don't know and embrace what you don't know. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Good talk.
Thank you, Sue.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. Would love to hear from you. See you next time.